Somewhere in your home right now, there's a thing you'd run back into a burning house to save. You know exactly what it is, and here's the strange part. You don't so much own it as to answer to it. It keeps a small room in the back of your mind and it charges rent. We tell ourselves that gathering enough will one day let us rest. This is a story about a man who gathered everything there was and never once got to rest. He believed a key was a thing that opened doors, and it took him most of his life to learn that a key also locks them, and that a hand curled around iron isn't much different than iron curled around a wrist. His name doesn't matter. The kingdom of that age forgot their kings the way we forget last year's worries. What matters is this: he owned everything, not as a way of speaking, but truly, on paper, in law. Every road that crossed the land was his, every field of wheat, every forest, every bridge, every mine, every fish in every stream. He owned every river in the kingdom, hundreds of them, running bright and cold down to the sea, and all of his life he had never once knelt at the edge of one to drink. He wasn't cruel and he wasn't greedy. Those are the easy villains, and this isn't that kind of story. He was a good man, and a careful one, handed the richest kingdom on earth along with a single instruction whispered by his dying father: hold on to it. So he did. Around his neck, on a plain cord, hung an old iron key, the key to the royal vault, where the wealth of the world sat stacked in the dark. In those days, people didn't bow to the king's face. They bowed to the key on his chest. It was the first thing they looked for and the last thing they forgot. Small children reached up to touch its shine. He'd been told the key was a symbol of his power, and every eye in the kingdom agreed. Most of us believe what everyone tells us early on, and only think too late to question it. One autumn, a traveler came up the road on foot, an old man, in no hurry, with a face like a dry riverbed. He carried one cloak, one walking stick, and one wooden cup, and that was all he carried in the world. No cart, no coin, no servant, no name that anyone remembered. The guards nearly turned him away, because a man who owns nothing is a difficult thing to account for. There's no ledger for him. But the king, who was curious, the way lonely people are, waved him through and asked him to stay. He liked the old man at once, and couldn't have said why. Out of pure habit, the king kept trying to give him things: a horse, a room of his own, a golden cup to replace the plain wooden one he carried with him. Each time the traveler only smiled and lifted up the cup he already carried, as if to say it had never cost him one night's sleep, so why trade it for one that might? The king that never met a pair of open hands that didn't want filling, it unsettled him, and he couldn't have told you why. There was a thing the king did every night, though he never given it a name. He would go down to the vault, alone in the small hours, press his palm flat against that great iron door, and count slowly in the dark. Then he would climb the stairs and lie awake. He never opened it. He couldn't say what he was counting, or the last time he had taken a single thing out to enjoy it. He guarded a room he never entered, and he'd never once noticed that he was the only thing in the palace that could never leave it. One afternoon the two of them walked past the walls, further than the king usually went, and the king grew thirsty. There was a stream, clear and quick over the stones, one of the hundreds that were his. He bent to kneel at it, but the iron key swung out from his chest on its cord and dipped into the water ahead of his hands, and its weight pulled him off his balance. Before he could try again, a servant came running up with a gold cup and filled it, pressed it into his grip. So the king drank from the golden cup, the way he always had, and beside him, without a word, the old man knelt at the same stream, dipped his hands into the current, and drank. The king watched him do it. He owned the river. The old man drank from it, and for the length of one breath, the king honestly couldn't have told you which one of them was richer. After that day, he began to notice the key the way you would notice a stone in your shoe. It clinked against the arm of the throne. At the feast, he had to lift it to one side so that he could lean over on the table. At night it was worse. He couldn't lie flat, because the iron pressed cold against his throat, so he slept curled around it, and woke in the dark with his fist already shut over it, checking. He owned 1,000 beds and slept badly in one, half waking to feel for the shape of the key against his ribs, the way a worried man keeps pressing a bruise to be sure it still hurts. Somewhere in those months, the cord wore a pale groove into the back of his neck, and the iron left a faint gray stain that there was no washing away. The traveler stayed on through the winter, asking almost nothing and noticing almost everything. Only once did he say a thing that stuck. The king had mentioned offhand that he'd always wanted to see the sea at the western edge of his kingdom, and in the same breath explained why he never could. Someone had to stay and watch the vault. The old man was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "Then who is watching you?" He didn't say it unkindly, and he didn't say anything after. He just let it hang around like questions usually do and follow him home. It all came apart on an ordinary night. The king couldn't sleep, which was nothing new. So he walked through the halls that were his, past the doors that were his, over floors that were his, and every board of it pressed down on him like a debt come due. Out in the courtyard, he found the old man asleep on the bare stones under an open sky, his cloak for a blanket, his cup by his hand. He was sleeping the way small children sleep, the way the king himself hadn't slept since the crown first came upon his ears. And standing there over a penniless old man, the king felt his own hand rise up, without his ever telling it to, and closing around the key. He looked down at his own fist in the moonlight. He had always believed the key kept him safe, and he understood, all at once, and without a word from anyone, that it never had. It had only ever kept him afraid, afraid of the one moment that it might be gone. He wasn't the man who owned the wealth of the world. He was the man it had hired to lie awake and guard it. He didn't wake anyone. He didn't make a decree. Just before dawn, he walked back out past the walls to the little stream over the stones. He stood at the edge for a long while. Then he reached up and lifted the cord over his head and set the iron key down in the wet grass on the bank. And the richest man in the world knelt at the running water, cupped his two empty hands, and drank. That was all. A grown man, a king, down on his knees at a stream, drinking from his own bare hands, while behind him an iron key lay cooling in the grass. He drank until his thirst was gone. Then he sat back on his heels and watched the sun come up over his fields. And he found that the fields were every bit as beautiful when he wasn't pressing them for harvest. Nothing had been lost. The kingdom hadn't crumbled because one key spent a single sunrise in the grass, and the back of his neck, where the iron had ridden for 20 years, was now cold and bare, and the cold felt like open air, not like loss. The old man left later that same day, the way travelers do. One cloak, one stick, one cup, up the road and over the hill, owning nothing, carrying everything he had. The king watched him go, and this time he didn't reach for a single thing to put in the old man's hands. He understood at last that they'd been full the entire time. So before this ends, sit with it a moment. There's something in your life your hand goes to 100 times a day, not to enjoy, only to be sure it's still there. What is it? And what would you truly lose if you set it down in the grass for the length of one morning? Not forever, just one sunrise. And here's the one worth sitting with the longest. Who might you have become in all these years if you had simply never picked it up at all? The old man could kneel and drink from any stream in the world because his hands were always empty. The king owned every river there was, and for most of his life, he couldn't reach into a single one. What you could not set down was never truly yours. You were only the one carrying it. If you like more ancient wisdom without fluff, take a moment and subscribe.